Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
The housing shortage is the biggest issue in this country almost. Along with cost of living, it actually all rolls in together when you think about it. It's going to be a big issue in the lead up to the election campaign. But interesting to see when you look at the position of the New South Wales Productivity Commission. Well, Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business has done just that. G'day, Leith.
G'day, Clinton. Hi.
I'm good, mate. You're not particularly a fan of the Productivity Commission.
Yeah, the New South Wales Productivity and Equality Commission, Clinton, they added the equality bit in there a year or so ago just to make it a little bit more woke. But I must admit, mate, I think this government agency is a bit of a clown show. So. And totally contradictory in their position. So a few months ago, the Productivity and Equality Commission, were complaining that young Sydney-siders were leaving Sydney, forced out by high housing costs. So what they did was they then came out and they said, we've got to deregulate rules around apartment building so that we can have basically get rid of height limits, get rid of minimum apartment sizes, get rid of balcony size, requirements for car parks, storage, all this sort of thing, so that we can build heaps and heaps of high-rise shoebox apartments to keep up with, the mad immigration-driven population growth. So instead of calling for less immigration, so we don't have to build all these high-rise dog boxes, they just called for deregulation. And they said that if we did all these things, rents might fall by 10%. So we're basically giving up 100% of amenity to potentially have a 10% fall in rents rather than just cutting immigration. And then last month, they came out again with their review of housing supply choices report. And they called on state and federal governments to stop spending money on infrastructure to free up labour and resources to build homes. Because they said that basically we've got too much infrastructure, investment going on, which is sucking out labour and capital, etc., away from the housing industry. Therefore, we can't build houses. So again, instead of just cutting immigration so that we don't have to build so much infrastructure and housing, they want to then rob Peter to pay Paul. Obviously, if we're going to grow a population like a science experiment, which is the plan, you're going to need heaps of infrastructure and heaps of housing. Well, then guess what? They pulled off the trifecta this week, and they've again argued that infrastructure needs to be curtailed. But this time, Clinton, it's to free up labour and resources to meet the net zero energy transition. So they basically, the Productivity and Equality Commission's head wrote in the SMH this week that they need to dial back infrastructure spending to support private investment in the net zero economy. So I'm presuming that means building, more wind turbines and that sort of thing. So, I'll be honest here. We can't simultaneously run a high immigration program, have high housing investment, high infrastructure investment, and net zero. It's all mutually exclusive. It just does not work. And 100% of New South Wales' population growth comes from immigration. So we had 170,000 in the year to March this year, which is the latest official data, population growth in New South Wales. And all of that was from net overseas migration. The New South Wales is projected to grow by about 4 million people over the next roughly, by 2071, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. All of that's going to come from immigration. And guess what? We're not going to meet net zero if New South Wales is not going to meet net zero if it increases its user bases, base of energy and resources and everything else by 4 million people. So this whole thing's a clown show. And what I don't understand is why won't the New South Wales Productivity and Equality Commission argue for lower immigration? Because if you slow the growth rate of New South Wales' population, guess what? You don't have to build as many houses, you don't have to build the infrastructure, and it also makes it easier to meet this mythical net zero target because you're not adding to consumers every year who use energy, use resource, and create emissions. That is the simplest solution to all this stuff. But these clowns at the New South Wales Productivity and Equality Commission keep ignoring the elephant in the room, and they want us to rob Peter to pay Paul, not build the infrastructure which you need if you're going to keep bringing people in, so they can build houses. Well, sorry, not build houses, build shoebox apartments, as well as invest more in this, net zero energy transformation, whatever that means. It's just ridiculous. Like we keep arguing around the main issue that is causing the housing crisis that is causing the shortage in infrastructure and is actually driving up emissions, which is population growth, which comes 100% from immigration. That is the driver, the sole driver of population growth in New South Wales is net overseas migration, because New South Wales loses basically the same amount of people interstate as they have births. So all of your population growth comes from net overseas migration. So if you want to improve the housing situation, you want to make sure that New South Welshmen have enough infrastructure, and you want to also slow the growth in emissions. The best thing to do is to slow the growth in the population. It's as simple as that. None of this is rocket science. It is so simple.
Well, you've actually just touched on why. You asked the question, why don't they talk about migration? Well, I think you've identified why, because they've changed their name to include the word equality. I think that says, I didn't even realise that, and I reported on the Productivity Commission, I didn't realise that that'd be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, this is the problem nationwide in Australia. We have all these governments, we have all these agencies, etc. They're not allowed to mention the elephant in the room, because as soon as they do that, it's xenophobia, it's racism, all that. It's not. It's a numbers game. And, we can't pretend to fix the housing crisis and to meet mythical net zero if Australia's population is going to grow by 13 million people in the next 39 years, which is the official projection from the intergenerational report. That is effectively adding another Sydney, another Melbourne and another Brisbane to Australia's existing current population in just 39 years. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to build about 6 million houses, 5.5 to 6 million houses, depending on the number of demolitions, etc., and the average household size. That's going to create a hell of a lot of carbon emissions, because, the built environment creates about 1/4 of the nation's emissions. It's also going to mean that we're going to forever be short of housing, because we'll never keep up with this massive population growth. And we will never have enough infrastructure. And the infrastructure we do get is going to end up being more toll roads, etc., which is going to cost consumers more, because they're going to end up having to pay to, Sydney's already seen this. 20 years ago, you had about 2 toll roads in Sydney. Now you have well over a dozen. And anywhere you drive now, you get basically taxed by Transurban. And we're just going to have more of this process if we keep growing like a science experiment through excessive levels of immigration. And we're never going to solve the housing crisis. And we're never going to meet this net zero. Look, to be honest with you, net zero is the biggest con ever. We're never going to meet it anyway. It's impossible. The world runs on hydrocarbons. I'm sorry to break it to you. That's the way it works. We can always cut our emissions, but we can't get to zero. And we certainly can't get to zero if we're going to grow the nation's population by 50% in just 39 years. That's 50% more people using energy, creating waste, etc., which just means it's even more impossible to meet net zero. So let's just call a spade here and stop, talking in circles and not mentioning the elephant in the room behind all this stuff, which is excessive population growth.
And all this adds to inflation, cost of living, interest rates. And it shows, the analysis from CBA shows that it's interest rates that hurt young people the most. Yeah,
this is quite startling stuff, but also expected. So the Commonwealth Bank released, data on the spending habits by age group, and this is based on CBA's CBA account. So CBA is the biggest bank in the country, so it's based on around 30% sample size of Australia's population, which is fantastic. It's better than the ABS can do. And what it showed is that Australians under the age of 40 have cut back their spending in the year to September. So the most recent year, they actually cut their expenditure despite the fact that we had inflation. Whereas Australians over the age of 60 spent significantly above the rate of inflation over the same time period. So we've got young people basically cutting their spending, and we've got older Australians spending freely and actually increasing their spending. And this is actually to be expected, because the Reserve Bank's interest rate tightening is designed to hit people with mortgages. And roughly one third of Australians carry a mortgage, 1/3 roughly rent, and 1/3 own the homes outright, and they tend to be older. And what we have a situation whereby the younger Australians with mortgages are getting smashed by interest rate hikes. So they're paying about 50% more on their mortgage than they were before the ABA started hiking. At the same time, the federal government's run a mass immigration program, which has absolutely, lifted rents through the roof. So we've got record low rental affordability, and rents have risen by about 30 to 40% since the pandemic, and that tends to hurt young people the most as well because they're the ones who are renting as well. Yet on the other side of the coin, we have the oldest segment of the population, those who are over 60, who tend to own the homes outright. So the home ownership rate, if you're retirement age, is nearly 80%. So 80% of older people own their homes, therefore they don't rent. And most of them own them outright, so they're not paying a mortgage. So we have this situation whereby the RBA's rate hikes are hammering the younger Australians. So the RBA is smashing 1/3 of Australians with mortgages to try and slow the economy on behalf of all Australians. And I don't blame the RBA for this because that's their only tool. At the same time, the federal government's got the foot on the accelerator running a big immigration program, which is driving up rents, which is also hurting young Australians, not the ones with mortgages, the ones who are renting. And then you have 1/3 of Australians who don't have a mortgage and aren't renting, who are doing fine. They're actually getting more money from their savings. They tend to own the rental properties or high share of rental properties, so they're getting the rental increases, etc. So it's a pretty unbalanced system we've got here. And again, I don't blame the RBA for this. They've only got one tool, and they're using it to try and slow the economy. What I do is I do blame the federal government, because the federal government should be helping the RBA slow demand, and it should be trying to distribute the pain more evenly across the generations or across the population, rather than just keeping the foot on immigration, spending too much, government spending, which is also fueling inflation, and then letting the RBA just use their one tool, which hurts only 1/3 of the population directly through interest rates.
Well, good luck trying to cut spending in the lead up to an election. Leith, always good to talk to you. We'll catch up next week.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Speak to you next time.
Leith Van Olsen from Macro Business, speaking a lot of sense this morning.